On a hill above the Pacific, in the north of Japan, there is a telephone booth standing in a garden. White frame, glass panes. Inside, on a small wooden shelf, a black rotary phone. It is not connected to anything. No line runs out of it. It has never carried a single call, and it never will. This morning, someone climbed that hill to use it. He took his cap off first, the way you do indoors. He lifted the receiver, and he dialed a number that stopped existing 11 years ago, slowly, with the whole finger, the way that phone requires. Then he did the thing that undoes everyone who watches it. He waited. Actually waited. Head tilted. The exact posture of a man listening to a line ring somewhere else in the world. Then he said, "It's me." More than 30,000 people have made that walk. Every single one of them knows the phone is dead. They come anyway, from across Japan and now from across the world, and most of them go back down the hill different than they came up. Lighter, steadier, able to drive home. Which leaves a stranger question than it first appears. Not why do they come? Why does it work? You already own a smaller version of that booth. It's in your pocket. Everyone listening right now has a name in their phone they will never call again and will also never delete. You know the one. It costs nothing to remove and you won't, because deleting it would be a decision, and keeping it is just an accident you renew every day for years. That is what holding on actually looks like. Not a grand refusal, a very small, very repeated not yet. And there is a reason that name is so hard to delete, one that has nothing to do with sentiment. In 2000, a neuroscientist named Kareem Nader broke a rule everyone thought was settled. Memory was supposed to set like plaster, recorded once, then filed. What Nader found is that a recalled memory doesn't play back. It comes apart. For a few hours, it sits soft and unstable, and it has to be rebuilt before it can be stored again. Which means the memory you have visited the most is the memory you have altered the most. The face you love best is the one you have repainted the most times. Every anniversary you spent remembering them, you were quietly editing them. Which is why the house you grew up in got warmer every year you were away from it. The summer got longer, the laughter got easier. Whoever you cannot let go of, you have been improving quietly for years without permission. And nobody on earth can release a masterpiece as easily as they could have released the truth. The man who built that booth knew none of this. He was a gardener with a problem. In 2010, a garden designer in the coastal town of Atsuchi learned his cousin had 3 months to live. His name was Itaru Sasaki. He was not a spiritual man, and he was not building a monument. He simply found, after the funeral, that he still had things to say and nowhere to put them. So he bought a second-hand phone booth and set it among his flowers, facing the sea, and put a disconnected rotary phone inside. He explained it plainly. His words could not travel down a wire, so he wanted them carried by the wind. He called it Kaze no Denwa, the phone of the wind. It was built for one man, to speak to one dead cousin, and it should have stayed that small. 3 months later, on the 11th of March, 2011, the sea came for Atsuchi. A magnitude 9 earthquake off the Tōhoku coast pulled the water back off the harbor floor, then sent it in as a wall moving at the speed of traffic. The town had a seawall. Around 1 in 10 people who lived there died that afternoon, the mayor among them, on the roof of a town hall that no longer exists. Whole families went into the water together, which meant that afterwards there was often nobody left to be told. Sasaki opened his garden to everyone. They came in the hundreds, then the thousands, fishermen, widows, schoolchildren, old men who had not cried in front of another human being since the war. They queued on a garden path, in the rain sometimes, to use a telephone they knew perfectly well was attached to nothing. There is a notebook on the shelf beside the phone. Sasaki has replaced it many times. People write in it after they hang up, and almost none of it is poetry. It is small. The house is finished. I passed the exam. I'm sorry about the last thing I said. And listen to what people actually say into that receiver, and it is almost never dramatic. They ask if the house was warm enough. They report on the grandchildren. A woman rang her mother to complain about her husband, the way she always had. And one man stood in that box and argued gently with his late wife about the chores he hadn't done. He paused for her answers. He shook his head at things she said. He laughed once. And then, still holding the receiver, he wept until the grief had somewhere to go. And nobody in that booth is pretending. That's the detail everyone gets wrong. They are not leaving their love in that glass box. They are leaving something else in there, something that has a name, and will come back for it. Not everyone can put the phone down, though. Some people build the opposite of that booth. Somewhere near you, a parent is keeping a room exactly as it was. Bed made. School bag against the desk where it landed. The dust wiped weakly, gently, like a ritual, because cleaning it is permitted, but moving anything is not. Visitors learn not to ask. Nothing in that room is allowed to change position, because if it moves, time moves, and if time moves, it's real. So the room stays at a fixed hour of a fixed day, and the person who cleans it ages alone. Nothing else alive does this. Nothing. And the closest thing we have to an explanation was found by people studying something nobody thinks of as dramatic: autumn. Because here's what nobody teaches you about falling leaves. The leaf does not fall. The tree lets it go. At the base of every leaf stem, the tree grows a thin seam of cells whose only purpose is separation. A weakness built on schedule, engineered from the inside, until the wind can take what the tree has already decided to release. The tree is not being cruel. It is being honest about winter. Leaves left on in the frost catch snow, and the weight tears the branches off the trunk. A tree that refuses winter does not stay green. It comes down in the first storm. So it opens 10,000 small seams, drops everything green it made that year, stands bare for 4 months, looking exactly like an ending, and carries next spring inside its own bark the entire time. Which raises a question we don't like. What does letting go actually cost an animal that does it well? In October 2022, a bar-tailed godwit left Alaska. A tag on its back recorded what happened next. 11 days and 1 hour in the air, 13,500 kilometers, across the open Pacific without landing once. No food, no water, no rest. It touched down in Tasmania. It was 4 months old. It had never made the journey before, and no adult flew with it. But the part that stays with you is what the bird does before it leaves. In the weeks beforehand, a godwit fattens until fuel is more than half its body weight, and then it shrinks the organs it will not need. The stomach, the intestines. It reduces its own digestive system to almost nothing, because it will not eat again until the other side of the ocean. The bird cannot make the crossing as the animal it was on the ground. The version of it that fed on an Alaskan mudflat is too heavy to survive an ocean, so it doesn't only leave the shoreline behind. It leaves itself behind, midair, over open water, with nowhere to land if it's wrong, and rebuilds the missing parts on the other side. The caterpillar's version is more absolute still. Inside the chrysalis, it does not sprout wings while remaining itself. Most of it becomes liquid first. Which brings us to the worst map ever handed to grieving people. In 1969, a Swiss-American psychiatrist named Elisabeth Kubler-Ross published a book describing 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. It became one of the most quoted ideas of the 20th century. But read who she was actually writing about. She had spent years sitting with terminally ill patients, people processing their own approaching deaths. Not the bereaved, not the ones left behind. She was mapping the country of the dying, and we handed that map to the living. And then, for 50 years, people who lost someone measured themselves against landmarks that were never drawn for them. I skipped anger. I'm stuck in bargaining. Something is wrong with me. Nothing was wrong with them. The map was wrong. Kubler-Ross herself said, near the end of her life, that the stages had never been meant as a sequence anyone was supposed to complete in order. What actually happens is slower and far less orderly. Acceptance is not a door you walk through once. It arrives in flickers, an afternoon where you forget to be sad, then guilt for forgetting, then another afternoon, longer. Healing does not announce itself. You notice it in hindsight, the way you notice you've stopped limping. 5 years after the wave, a sociology student named Yuka Kudo took a train up that same coast, to Ishinomaki, and started asking taxi drivers one question. Had anything unusual happened to them since the disaster? Most refused. Some got angry. 7 of them told her a version of the same story. A passenger gets in, a winter coat in summer, an address in a district where there are no longer any houses. The driver takes the fare and drives. When he turns around at the destination, the back seat is empty. Believe whatever you like about that. Here is the part that is not in dispute, because it's written down. Every one of those drivers had started the meter. Their logbooks recorded the journeys as unpaid fares. And not one of them refused the passenger. One told her that if it happened again, he'd take them anyway. That is not a country that finds it strange to keep company with the dead. In Japanese homes, there is often a small altar in the main room where a family speaks to their dead the way you'd speak to someone sitting in the next chair. The first rice of the morning, the exam results, an apology for coming home late. Children grow up watching adults do it. Nobody calls it denial. Western psychology spent most of the last century calling it exactly that. Grief was detachment work. Sever the bond, withdraw the love, spend it somewhere else. Then, in 1996, researchers went and looked at what bereaved people actually do, and the healthy ones weren't severing anything. They were keeping the relationship and changing its shape. The researchers named it continuing bonds, and half the world had been quietly doing it at a small wooden altar for about 400 years. So the wind phone is not a magic trick and never claimed to be. It is a place where the words you are still carrying are allowed to leave your body and go somewhere. Not to a listener, to a destination. That turns out to be the entire difference. Here's what the booth does not ask of anyone. It never asks you to stop loving. Nobody walks out of that garden having deleted a husband. Because letting go was never about the person. You don't release the dead, you release the waiting. The part of you still standing at the door with the porch light on, listening for a car. That's what people leave in the booth. Not their love, their vigil. And the same seam has to open for the living. The friend you'd have taken a bullet for at 19, who is now a stranger with your history. Nobody betrayed anybody. There was no final conversation, and that's what makes it unbearable. 2 people simply kept walking, and the angle between them was so small at first that neither one noticed it becoming a continent. Hope, when it finally comes, does not arrive on schedule and never on demand. It shows up on the first morning you make coffee for one without it feeling like an accusation. So, why does a disconnected telephone work? Not because anyone is listening. It works because everyone in that booth knows nobody is and speaks anyway. A working line would be a lie, and a lie fixes nothing. Which is why a seance leaves people hungrier and a phone box leaves them lighter. The deadline is honest. It offers no reply, no forgiveness, no version of them agreeing with you. It offers one thing only, and it turns out to be the missing one, somewhere to put the sentence. Grief doesn't need an audience. It needs an address. That's the whole art, on one Japanese hillside. Not forgetting, not moving on, saying the last thing out loud, and then setting the phone down, and walking back down the hill in the weather. There are wind phones now in Ireland, in Canada, in hospice gardens and public parks across the United States. Nobody planned that. There was no campaign and no organization. A garden designer in a fishing village built a glass box for one conversation with one cousin, and it turned out the whole world had been standing around holding sentences with nowhere to put them. You will not keep any of this, not the summer, not the face, not the version of yourself hearing these words. It was all arriving and leaving the entire time you were worried about holding it. Somewhere tonight, someone is climbing a hill above the sea to say the last thing into a phone that isn't connected. Let it go, not because it didn't matter, but because it did.